Hello guys, Public back with another video, and today we are looking at the second legendary that was changed for Shadow Priest in the upcoming build on the Shadowlands beta, which is Eternal Call to the Void. If you didn't miss it, I originally went over this legendary and all the other ones, but they've actually changed this significantly enough to where I have to make another video. Yesterday, in the last video, we went over Shadowflame Prism changes. If you haven't seen that, check that out. And today we're going over Eternal Call to the Void. TLDR guys, they listened either to me or to the other people talking about the legendary, how to do some quick fixes now that we're getting close to Shadowlands. So let's talk about the changes they've made, what that means to the legendary, and kind of my thoughts overall on it. Alright, let's get started. Okay guys, so what changed with this legendary? So before, this was just kind of copy and pasted from Legion more or less and saying, hey, your Mind Flay ticks have a chance to spawn a Mind Flay Tendril to Mind Flay your target, give you some insanity, right? Which, you know, thematically is cool. It looks very awesome. It was my favorite legendary in terms of the thematics of it. Now, was it super viable or did it make sense in all situations? No, primarily because, you know, in Legion, that was just a baseline passive. It wasn't a choice, but now it is a legendary, right? So it should have some meat behind that choice, right? And the problem is we don't just have Mind Flay, we have Mind Seer as well. So my biggest complaint here, a quick fix to make, was saying like, hey, the legendary doesn't even work with our other filler. If it's going to be kind of a legendary around Mind Flay, it should also work with Mind Seer as well. So they listened to that feedback and they took that into account, and now they've changed it, right? It's not a substantial overhaul, but it's enough to really highlight the difference. So right now, Mind Flay and Mind Seers now have a chance to spawn a Void Tendril or Void Lasher that channels at your target for 15 seconds and then generates 3 insanity every time it ticks. So the tooltip's still a little weird. It's still a little weird to read, and I was very surprised when I first used the legendary. But basically, it copies whatever you're doing, right? So I'm basically imagining this being kind of two separate spells. They share the same proc rate, but depending on what you're doing, it'll proc something different, right? So if you're channeling Mind Flay, the legendary works exactly the same way it works now, no change. However, if you are actually channeling Mind Seer instead, and then you get a proc, right? You do get a chance on every damage event. It is still the same RPPM. 2 procs per minute modified by haste. So if you're channeling Mind Seer, it will then instead proc a Void Lasher, which is a very large tentacle. It's like, I don't know, 2 or 3 times bigger than the Mind Flay one, that instead channels Mind Seer at your target, right? So essentially saying you can proc at Mind Seer, it's going to keep casting Mind Seer, right? If you proc the Mind Flay one, it keeps casting Mind Flay. The important thing to note here, the insanity generation is actually flat no matter what, right? So every time it's dealing damage, you're getting that 3 insanity. Obviously on AoE, you're getting more ticks because you're hitting more targets. But that still means, you know, if you're getting more targets, you get more damage if it's casting Mind Seer or vice versa, right? The Mind Flay is more damage single target, of course. The coefficients are super weird right now, so I don't actually... The problem with this is it's not actually the same Mind Flay and Mind Seer spells that we have. So, you know, from an efficiency standpoint, we're not quite sure yet if it's like... the target cutoff for Mind Seer versus Mind Flay might not match the same for this legendary. I'm assuming that's just numbers tuning. They're still kind of working on the legendary, so I'm kind of assuming that'll get fixed because the spell data is literally all over the place. I don't really know how to do this. It is put into SimC, but I had to kind of guess and kind of hard code some stuff. It's a little bit of a mess, but the idea is still the same, that it's essentially replicating what your character wants to be doing against your targets that you're casting on, kind of making it like a smart pet, more or less, or at least a smart cast of that channel. So all in all, guys, a very solid change. I'm very happy. I will say, using the legendary, it feels better. However, compared to the last legendary that we just reviewed, the Shadowflame Prism legendary, it is not quite as exciting, right? The interactions are still there with the legendary, although now this just makes it a bit easier to use, a bit more viable in more situations, which is always a great thing, making you feel a little bit better about using this legendary given whatever choice you're making, right? Is it the Mythic Plus legendary? You know, probably not, just because of how strong Shadowflame Prism is and the interactions it can use. However, that being said, any kind of piece of content where you're like, okay, I actually kind of want a mix of good single target, but not be useless on AoE, right? That's the niche for this legendary. Maybe there's a tyrannical week for a specific dungeon that makes sense for that. Maybe it's a specific boss fight that has adds that kind of need to be cleaved down, but you know, you still don't want to be useless on the boss. So this gives you that kind of flexibility within a legendary that we haven't really seen before. And I think that's really, really interesting. So there is kind of still some, like, you know, criticism there of like, well, it doesn't have a lot of interaction with our spec right now. Although I think once, or if they do change Devouring Plague to kind of work with like some kind of stacking mechanic, that extra insanity that we're getting from this legendary could really, we could feel that better in our rotation, instead of now we're kind of just dumping insanity into the void more or less, right? If you're overcapping insanity, you're kind of just recasting Devouring Plague, and it's not really doing much. You're getting that initial hit of Devouring Plague, but until they fix like whatever they want to do with, stacking Devouring Plagues, this is still kind of a problem. So I think once that gets fixed, or if that gets fixed, I'm hoping it gets fixed, that, the extra insanity generation you get from this legendary does feel better rotationally, because right now it can just kind of not matter at all, which is okay, but obviously not preferable, right? So all in all, guys, I'm very happy with these changes. I think it was great for like a quick fix going into the expansion. This makes it much more usable. We'll see how that works out, especially now compared to the other two Shadow-specific legendaries that we have. I almost don't really see a reason to ever not use this one or Shadowflame Prism from either a playstyle perspective or just in general, how good they are. So I don't know, we'll see what happens. Fingers crossed they take the same kind of measured approach to that feedback we've been giving about the other two legendaries they haven't touched yet, guys. So we'll see what happens. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know between this one or the last one we looked at yesterday, which one you're preferring. I'm kind of curious on your thoughts. I'm kind of leaning towards the Shadowflame Prism legendary as my favorite, but, this one still looks very, very awesome. The new tentacle is great, so we'll see what happens, guys. All right, thanks for watching. Have a good one.